Hello, BookTube. I'm here with an essay. Actually, there'll be two back to back, in a sense, because there's a little bit of event that Amy at the Dusty Bookshelf and myself are doing. We're going to read a book each by A. Edward Newton. Mine is The Amenities of Book Collecting, and I will today read the essay Introductory, as he titles it, and the first chapter. And then on Sunday, Amy will read the first chapter of hers, and then we'll alternate every day with a chapter. And it should be quite interesting because they are made to be essays. They were published as sort of articles slash essays, and then when put into book form, there might have been another one added, as in the case of mine. Mine is his first book, The Amenities of Book Collecting and Kindred Affections, published in 1918 in the U.S., and my edition here is John Lane, The Bodley Head, 1920. So I'll read the dedication, which is kind of interesting. If, as Eugene Field suggests, women folk are few in that part of paradise especially reserved for book lovers, I do not care. One woman will be there, for I shall insist that 8 and 20 years probation entitles her to share my bibliobliss above as she has shared in here below. That woman is my wife. A. Edward Newton, October 1918. And the essay introductory starts. A man or a woman is the most interesting thing in the world, and next to a book which enables one to get at the heart of the mystery, and although not many men can say why they are or what they are, any man who publishes a book, if he's on good terms with the publisher, secure the use of a little space to tell how the book came to be what it is. Some years ago, a very learned friend of mine published a book, and in the introduction warned the gentle reader to skip the first chapter, and as I've always maintained, by inference, suggested that the rest of was easy reading, which was not the case. In point of fact, the book was not intended for the gentle reader at all. It was a book written by a scholar for the scholar. Now, I have worked on a different plan. My book is written for the tired businessman. There are a goodly number of us who flatters himself that he is fond of reading and as it is my first book, I may be permitted to tell how it came to be published. One day in the autumn of 1913, a friend and partner, with whom it has been my privilege to be associated for many years, remarked that it was time for me to take a holiday, and handed me a copy of Geographical Magazine. The number was devoted to Egypt, and, seduced by the charm of the illustrations on the spur of the moment, I decided on a trip up the Nile. Things moved rapidly. In a few weeks, my wife and I were on the Mediterranean on a steamer headed for Alexandria. We had touched at Genoa and were soon to reach Naples when I discovered a feeling of homesickness stealing over me. I have spent my happiest holidays in London. Already I had tired of Egypt. The Nile has been flowing for centuries and would continue to flow. There were books to be had in London, books which would not wait. Somewhat shamefacedly, I put the matter up to my wife, and when I discovered that she had no inseparable objection to change of plan, we left the steamer at Naples, and after a few weeks with friends in Rome, started on grand vitesse towards London. By this time, it will have been discovered that I am not much of a traveler, but I have always loved London. London, with its wealth of literary and historic association, with its countless miles of streets lined with inessential shops, overflowing with things that I don't want, and its grimy old bookshops overflowing with things that I do. One gloomy day I picked up in a Charing Cross road for a shilling a delightful book by Richard Le Gallienne, Travels in England. Like myself, Le Gallienne seems not to have been a great traveller. He seldom reached the place he started for, and losing his way or changing his mind, may be said to have arrived at his destination when he has reached a comfortable inn where after a simple meal he lights his pipe and proceeds to read a book. Exactly my idea of travel. The last time I read Pickwick was while making a tour in northern Italy. It is wonderful how seductive to reading I found the stuffy smoking rooms of the little steamers that dart like water spiders from one land into another on the Italian lakes. It was while I was poking about among the old bookshops that I discovered that I start that again. It was while I was poking about among the old bookshops that it occurred to me to write a little story about my books, when and where I had bought them, the prices I had paid, and the men I had bought them from, many of whom I knew well. And so, when my holiday was done, I lived over again its pleasant associations to writing a paper that I called Book Collecting Abroad. Subsequently, I wrote another, Book Collecting at Home. It's been my purpose to print these papers in a little volume to be called The Amenities of Book Collecting. I intended this for distribution among my friends who were very patient with me, and I sent my manuscript to the printer in the closing days of July 1914. A few days later, something happened in Europe, the end of which is not yet. We all became panic stricken. For a moment, it seemed unlikely that one would ever open a book again. Acting upon impulse, I withdrew my order from my printer, put my manuscript aside, and devoted myself to my usual task, that of making a living. Byron says the end of all scribblement is to muse. For some years, I have been possessed for an itch for scribblement. Gradually, this feeling reasserted itself, and I came to see that we must become accustomed to working in a world at war, and to realizing that life must be permitted to resume, at least to some extent, its regular course, and the idea of my little book reoccurred to me. It had frequently been suggested by friends that my papers be published in the Atlantic. What grudge they bore to this excellent magazine, I do not know, but they always said the Atlantic, and so, when one day I came across my manuscript, it occurred to me that it would cost only a few cents to lay it before the editor. At that time, I did not know the editor of the Atlantic, even by name. My pleasure then can be imagined when a week or so later I received the following letter, dated October 30th, 1914. Dear Mr. Newton, the enthusiasm of your pleasant paper is contagious, and I find myself in odd moments looking at the gaps in my own library with a feeling of dismay. I believe that very many readers of the Atlantic will feel as I do, and it gives me great pleasure to accept your paper. Yours sincerely, Ellery Sedgwick. Shortly after, a check for a substantial sum fluttered down upon my desk, and it was impossible that I should not remember how much Milton received for his Paradise Lost, the receipt for which is in the British Museum, and draw conclusions therefrom entirely satisfactory to my self-esteem. My paper was published, and the magazine, having a hearty constitution, survived. I even received some praise. There was nothing important enough to justify criticism, and as a result of this chance publication, I made a number of delightful acquaintances among readers and collectors, many of whom I might almost call friends, although we have never met. Not wishing to strain the rather precarious friendship with Mr. Sedgwick, which was the outcome of my first venture, it was several years before I ventured to try him in another paper. This I called A Ridiculous Philosopher. I enjoyed writing this paper immensely, and although it was the reverse of timely, I felt that it might pass editorial scrutiny. Again, I received a letter from Mr. Sedgwick in which he said, 2 days ago I took your paper home with me and spent a delightful half hour with it. Now, as an editor, would tell you there is no valid reason for a paper on Godwin at this time, but your essay is so capitally seasoned that I cannot find it in my heart to part with it. Indeed, I have been gradually making the editorial discovery that, if a paper is sufficiently readable, it has some claim upon the public, regardless of what the plans of the editor are. And so the upshot of my deliberation is that we shall accept your paper with a great pleasure and publish it when the opportunity occurs. The paper appeared in due course, and several more followed. The favor with which these papers were received led the Atlantic editors to consideration of their reprint in permanent form, together with several which now appear for the first time. All the illustrations have been made from items in my own collection. I am thus tying a string, as it were, around the parcel which contains the result of 36 years of collecting. It may not be much, but as the Irishman said of his dog, it's mine own. My volume might, with propriety, be called Newton's Complete Recreations. I have referred to my enjoyment in writing my ridiculous philosopher. I might say the same for all the papers. I am aware that my friend Dr. Johnson once remarked that no man but a blockhead writes a book except for money. At some risk, then, I admit that I have done so. I have written for fun, and my papers should be read, if read at all, for the same purpose, and that the reader will or is expected to laugh aloud. The loud laugh, in Goldsmith's phrase, it may be remembered, bespeaks the vacant mind, but I venture to hope that the judicious will pass a not unpleasant hour in turning my pages. One final word. I collect presentation copies, and I trust my friends will not think me churlish when I say that it is not my intention to turn a single copy of this my book into presentation volume. Whatever circulation it may have must be upon its own merits, and one who sees this book in the hands of a reader on the library table or in the shelves of the collector may be sure that someone, either wise or foolish as the event may prove, has paid a substantial sum for it, either in the current coin of the realm or perchance to thrift stamps. It may indeed be that it has been secured from a lending library, in which case I would suggest that the book be returned instantly. Go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And having separated yourself from your money, in the event that you should feel vexed with your bargain, you are at liberty to communicate your grievance to the publisher, securing from him what redress you may. And in the event of failure, there yet remains your inalienable right, which should afford some satisfaction, that of damning. The author, Oak Knoll, Dalesford, Pennsylvania, April 7th, 1918. Now, that ends the introductory essay. Now, as you notice there, it said Oak Knoll. That was the name of his house, and that's where he had his collection of books. And I've mentioned this already, but many may know the publisher Oak Knoll Press, which came out. They started, I think, in the 70s. I haven't looked up their start date, but they took the name from Newton's house, so Oak Knoll Press. And Newton lived from 1864 to 1940. I'm getting most of this or all of this information via Wikipedia, which doesn't do a lot. It doesn't say what he did for making a living. He comes across as if he's sort of a poor book collector, or not so much a poor book collector, but he's not in the ranks of those that would buy Gutenberg Bibles and that. So he's just a humble collector, but he's still collecting stuff that is beyond most people's budgets. So he must have, which I haven't looked up, but he must have had ran a business that was either on stocks or bonds in New York, because he seemed to travel in every day from his country estate, Oak Knoll, to London. But yeah, he amassed about 10,000 books apparently. And in 1941, there was a sale for a large part of his collection. It lasted several months, and there is there's a fourth volume, I think, too, with regarding his book collection and what was in the sale, I believe. And it's he had a lot of collections. He liked Charles Lamb. He liked Johnson, so he had a lot of Johnsonania and Lamb material, as I say, and a few other things. And he loved presentation copies, so he would have stuff that was from signed Shelley to somebody else, or to Shelley by the author. So he would collect these things, and he had a lot. a lot of Dickens association copies, presentation copies, which are very neat, but they are getting pricey now. Well, they always were pricey by the sounds of it. Uh, we will see during his essays here. But a few other things I just wanted to know. I love this frontispiece of a caricature of two sort of eminent Victorians, Makepeace Thackeray and Charles Dickens, which was kind of cool. And another thing that was interesting was um, Newton liked having a book plate, and he struggled getting it, and I'll be explaining that, or well, he will explain it in a chapter here. But he finally had one that is Johnson and Goldsmith in the Temple, and the let me see, where is it? This is I think it's a Temple Mall down sort of discussing things and with Oak Knoll, and that's what he had done for his book plate, which is kind of cool. But the other thing I found very interesting while reading this, especially the introduction here, he talks about that he wrote a couple essays, he wrote a few things for friends he wanted to publish. So in 1940 he sends it off to the publisher, and then the war starts, and then thinking, oh, this it's war and nobody's going to care about books, ever again. Thinking, so he pulls it back, and then later he starts thinking, well, the war is, I guess, continuing on. Got to, try to live, and with this, and make the best of things. And then so he sort of looked back into it, and I found that sort of while I was reading this in 2020 with the pandemic, because the first thing is, with isolation, a lot of people on BookTube talking about they've lost the will to sort of, not will so much, but the interest to read a lot. But then they finally are getting back into it, and then there's still, there's a lot of talk. Will publishers recover from this? Will there be books anymore? Will it go towards, there's been a lot of talk like that, but I think it's starting to pick up now, and things are at least this point, they're figuring out how to work within the situation, and for publishers, writers, and so forth to continue, which I found very, very interesting. But anyway, I'll leave it there. I've prattled on so much here now, but yeah. So immediately after this goes up, there will be the chapter one, and then I'll leave a link to Amy's channel below, and she'll be reading the first chapter of her this book selling game, which was Edward Norton's third book. This is his first, but she'll be reading from his third book. But anyway, take care, BookTube. I will see you later. Bye.